Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics. Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Fred Schenkelberg.
And this is Chris Jackson. We're talking about the problems many of us can sometimes experience when we are in an organization with very short-term thinking, or fair means or foul.
Yeah, and I've been in two different organizations that both had a genuine long-term process in it before I became a consultant. So I thought that was just the way business was done. And both had very long-standing founders that really embedded the culture is that, this is what we do. And either shortly before I got to the organization or shortly after, is the founders retired or moved on. And for whatever reason, somebody else became, for whatever reasons I don't ever fathom, somebody else became the CEO and said, we need quarterly results. And it was the classic, all hands on deck, make all shipments, make all sales in the last week. And, and then 3 months later, we'd do it all over again. And I'm like, why do orders only show up in the last week? Like, why is that happening? Why are we doubling our warranty costs since the new CEO got in place? Doesn't he know that comes right out of profit? And I asked him that in one organization. It wasn't that big of a deal. So organization, and one of my techs actually called the CEO's office and says, hey, would you like to come over and join our morning meeting, next Thursday? And he says, yeah, sure. And he says, and then my tech he know no boundaries. He was great. I loved working with him. He said, and that means you get to bring the donuts, right? So he did. He brought some really good donuts for our meeting. And then we told our boss that the CEO is coming to sit in on our next staff meeting. And she was not happy with us. But the idea of short-term versus long-term has a variety of different causes. I run into it in organizations where it's the stockholders are perceived as the primary stakeholders. And we kind of lose focus on the customers. And so squeezing another $1.50 out of profit out of each sale comes from somewhere, and often it comes at the customer's expense.
But
for example, or it comes from, and this one I think is becoming more and more prevalent. I saw an article the other day. There's the turnover of CEOs in senior management in an organization is an all-time high. Is 2 years and you move, 2 years you move. And some organizations actually rotate, like the military does, their leadership in different parts of the organization on purpose. So they get a broad view of the organization and everything else. And I think we've talked about it before, is then they're there to I need to make a mark and make a difference, and it's got to show up within 2 years. And then I get all the credit for it and I move on. Whereas reliability really does take a long-term approach to really be effective for an organization. So I don't know. What's your experience? Have you seen it getting worse or better, or?
I mean, I think first and foremost, one of the issues you need to deal with when it comes to reliability is, yes, the short-term thinking. I mean, people often see, I use those problems. Problem number one, that's a problem in the hands of a user or customer, which is something which is easily put at the back of our conscious minds and thought processes. It's not my problem. And even if it was my problem, the problem needs to be addressed by a whole orchestra of people working in harmony. If I decide to lose my weekends to make my little component that much more reliable, it's all for nothing unless everybody else does it too. So I've just, created the rationale for me not having to do quality or reliability stuff. And when reliability and quality starts to work well is when people understand that if you want to drive down production costs, if you want to drive down time to market, you embed reliability and quality processes from the very start. So you prevent not only those failures in the hands of the customer, but those crises and fires during production, which just suck up all that additional money and suck up all that additional time and cause those,
Well, even in the development process, it's, I recently ran into an organization that was about 50 to 60% of their engineering staff was dealing with shipped products and the redesigning stuff and fixing things. And, and I said, let's talk to the director of engineering. If what would they be able to do if they had half their staff back to actually
Mhm.
work on new products? you know?
Yep. It's always the way. It's just, stitching time saves nine in in quality and reliability. It saves a whole lot more than nine, and it
Yeah.
costs a lot less than 1/9 of the problems that it would otherwise manifest themselves. So, but yeah, so what quality and reliability happens when organizations start realizing that it actually drives down time to market and budget before you release your product, let alone your warranty costs or the remediation costs or the field service costs or anything
Yep.
else that you have to incur. And until you make that fundamental change in belief, it never happens, because then your reliability and quality is efforts are now in direct competition with the here and now. And so then people say, well, how much do I need to do? When is it good enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
And it's just all bad.
Yep. Yeah. And where I see the pressure is and I'm seeing it more and more prevalent, is that a mid-level manager needs to get short-term results so that whatever measure they're being measured on, I need results next week or by the end of the quarter. Otherwise, I'm not going to be considered for that promotion. And my resume won't look as strong if I want to go over to our competitors or some other program. It's working for your resume is different than working for your customer in
Mhm.
in many cases. It can be seriously synced up and aligned where you do great things and the customers get the benefit of it, or you could do stuff so that you look good. And I think those are very different. It's do good versus look good, uh,
Yeah.
to simplify it way too much.
Yeah, polished incompetence. But so to answer so the question that was asked was, how do I work in an organization with short term focus and everything else? Well,
Yep.
the first step is just making people believe again in their bones that, well, if we do a FMEA, if we do a fault tree analysis or HALT, or if we institute SPC from the start, or do a process, whatever the right activity is, from the very start, then we're going to prevent those 78 fires that we had in the previous product development, which meant the shipping was delayed by 3 months, and they had to bump up the recommended retail price by $10 or whatever
Mm-hmm.
the outcome was. That's where you start to get buy-in, but then you need to convince people that that's going to happen.
Yeah, it's because you're still putting out fires from the last project.
Hmm.
That's the hard part. Is one person used the analogy is like we're trying to build an aircraft here while it's flying. We're so busy and it's already out the door and we're still trying to catch up with it and get the wings attached, kind of thing. And there was a commercial, a Super Bowl ad commercial that actually showed that.
Hmm.
and when the job is done right and then the guys are parachuting off the wings, after they put the last rivets in it. I don't know if I'd want to take that flight, but and then the flight attendant was pouring a guy a cup of coffee, but they hadn't finished all the walls and doors and skins on it yet. So it was just, 100-mile-an-hour wind. So she's pouring this cup of coffee like in a normal quiet cabin and it's just going straight into his face with the wind. And they were looking like, oh, that's normal. It's like, but anyway, I digress. I got to find a link to that ad. It is tough to change the culture or the approach or whatever, yet it has to start if you're ever going to break that cycle. The hardest part is that you need a champion somewhere in the organization that has that long-term view. If the entire management team is really 2 years and out, it's going to be tough unless they understand that I'm going to set the foundation for the next person who's going to have a similar approach and build on that foundation. The next person's going to continue to build on that and not change direction every 2 years. That's hard to do. Yet showing the value of it, the case of it, the small changes that occur that make a difference and improves the life of your team and the organization and its capabilities, it can be done, but it takes a lot of persistence and so on. It's a whole lot easier if your management team says, no, we're doing this for the long term, and get those middle managers that are in and out or being rotated to understand the priorities. It's not about you, dude. It's about actually creating a product that we can actually sell for a profit.
You talked about the military experience as well, where, especially in offices, the officer calls you spend 2 years in a position, then you're posted. And if you've done well, you get posted to a better, more senior position. And if you haven't, you get posted to a menial, less prestigious position. But then there's, and I've read and followed several commentators on this in this area, because essentially after World War II, that became a thing where you rotate through commands from Korea, Vietnam, and up until today in Afghanistan. And it essentially meant that the leadership were never essentially ever associated with success or failure. You look at Afghanistan, which general muffed that one?
Well, there's like a dozen of them
Right.
that are in and out of there. But when you go to World War II, there's Eisenhower and Montgomery and a handful of others you can name, and they were there for the duration.
Right, because they were successful. So they knew what they were doing. They're sometimes very difficult to deal with outside of their military profession, but they were tolerated because they were outstanding at what they did. MacArthur's another one.
Yeah, I've heard stories about MacArthur.
Yeah, he didn't last very long after World War II finished.
Nope.
Neither did
Patton.
Patton.
They named a tank after him, though.
Right. But Montgomery was borderline impossible to tolerate. So he just, once World War II was over, he got his medals and everything else, but he was a hard man to deal with and very arrogant and everything else. But they were just absolutely outstanding at what they did. And so they stayed the course. And if you weren't outstanding at what you did as a general, as a rule, you were given 3 months and then you were relieved of command. Now, the thing is, though, that wasn't necessarily a death knell to your career. A general, there's multiple instances of generals being relieved in their command in World War II, being appointed to command another formation or whatever the right
another organization in a different theater, for example, or
right.
A different role, but then they excelled at it.
Right. And sometimes it was generals who were better at operating in a multinational force versus those who, with their home country soldiers and everything else.
Yep.
And so that has now gone. We now have success and failures completely uncoupled from those people who rotate in or float in and out every 2 years, because their success or failure is very, very short-term focus. And their failure is very, strategic failure is very hard to apportion to any one individual. And so you have this toxic Western military senior strategic leadership, which infests I'd argue, the US DoD, the Australian Department of Defense, the UK MOD. We haven't won a war really since World War II. And you think about it, Korea's a stalemate, Vietnam failure. You could, make
pretty easy arguments ever since. Yeah, no, I get it.
Right.
Yet in business, it's part of it is that the perception is that you do a job, and to get your next posting, your next promotion, is you got to go to a different company. You can interview for a pay raise easier than being recognized inside your company. And different companies behave differently. And you were briefly talking about one of your recent clients that the everybody in the organization owned a piece of the company. It was, I don't remember what the term of that kind of
Associate.
organization, associates. They all
Yeah.
had skin in the game basically. And if we didn't do well, then they didn't do well. And if you did
Right.
really well, they all did really well. And the idea, and I saw that in even large organizations, depending on how the bonus structure is set up, is if you're rewarded for quarterly results or shipping a project on time, independent of whether it was any good or not, or procurement organizations reducing cost, independent of what the havoc it wreaked on the product's performance. So and people talked about for decades this balanced scorecard. You need, balancing measures and metrics but bonuses and setting guidelines and objectives and all of those things help to get the organization to achieve results. If that's done well and balanced, it can include reliability and quality and customer satisfaction with a long-term view of it. And I've seen it happen. But I think even better is that when everybody in the team is part of the organization as an owner, essentially, it makes it a lot easier to be motivated by the long term. And imagine that it also really reduces their turnover.
Right. And speaking of long-term ambitions, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn because it's actually quite endearing, is that this organization in particular, when it had hits to, to its operations through GFCs and COVIDs and the rest, they didn't lay off. That like a zero layoff policy, and that meant that associates were mowing lawns and doing all sorts of other things that were often to try and keep people involved, and that also allowed them to do a lot of R&D during that time. And so when the markets came roaring back, they were able to launch 4 or 5 brand new products and got a jump start on the rest of the on their competition as a
Yep.
result. And that's long-term thinking right there.
Yep. Yep.
But
Yeah. Their
and
quarterly
that's
results didn't look good, I'm sure, but
no,
that wasn't the priority.
right. And when you look at it that in that context, it's very hard just to work out what boxes need to be ticked in order to turn your organization into one that approaches that. It's not straightforward.
No, it takes some enlightened leadership, in my opinion, or somebody that really wants to design and build a culture that does look at the long term. Changing it is tough. There's no doubt about it. And there's, I think for the practitioner, for the person that's, especially a new reliability engineer or somebody that's just getting started as their first, saying, oh, we got to get serious about reliability. Let's get Sarah in here. She's dried out of school. She's good. And it's like, and she may be brilliant. Yet if she doesn't have if every attempt to improve reliability is pushed back, well, that's too costly or that's not important or whatever. Well, Sarah's going to go somewhere else.
Yeah,
Very
quick. And the people, and you lose the talent, and the people who stay behind are the ones who can't easily get a job somewhere else. And so, yeah, you keep losing over and over and over again.
Well, it's a long-term strategy to become mediocre.
Right. But again, we are, me personally, I'm sort of highlighting Boeing a lot recently, but that's exactly what Boeing's been doing in a lot of the stuff in the past. And it's just, they essentially cut the amount of money they're prepared to pay the suppliers. That had an amazing effect on quarterly this, that, and the other. And of course, here we are.
Yeah. You pay for it. Pay me now or pay me later is the phrase I've used more than once. It's like, yeah, you can cut that. Are you going to pay the warranty cost? No, it's not my budget. All right, we can fix that. I'll go talk to your boss and your boss's
Right.
boss and say, you just cost the company $10 million for your decision. Do you want to tell them that or you want me to tell them that? Okay. I've had those discussions a few times, even at the VP level. I've run into a couple of VPs in organizations that were empire building. There's no other word for it. If they had 100 employees in their part of the organization, they would become a senior vice president or whatever it was, and they had parking spots and all kinds of perks and benefits and all this stuff. And I'm like, why are you doing it? Well, that's my measure of success. Oh, so that you are famous and rich and admired. Is that it? Yeah. And he didn't say it in so many words, but yeah. I said, do customers ever complain about your products? Oh, customers always complain. That's
That's
just what they
what
do.
I'm
Yeah,
Yeah,
we don't need them.
they're the worst.
Yeah. Yeah. This would be a great business if we didn't have customers. Like,
Yes.
let's think about that for a minute. And this guy he was in a customer service organization.
There you go. Yeah, you got to believe it in your bones that that reliability stuff is going to just make it work.
We've just painted a real dismal picture of our profession here. The way organizations, not all organizations, and it is possible to make a difference, even if it's one program or project at a time, or one product line at a time, or one building at a time, or whatever. It is possible. And it is worth the fight because it really does make a difference, both for the organization and for your customers. And you get a benefit from it, but it's serving the customers, serving the quality of life within the organization is. I always look at firefighting as kind of just ghastly way to work, and for all kinds of reasons. It's probably a topic for another episode. But the idea is that you can make a difference, and it does, like Chris says, is if it's in your bones, you can help other people get that deeper understanding of that long-term push to it. Plenty of headwinds. There's no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, if you land in an organization that's not fighting against you to make changes for the long term, then you're lucky, in my opinion. And they do exist, but it's not a static world. The new set of management comes in, and all of a sudden you're back to the short term again. It doesn't take long. So good luck wherever you land. And if you've got a question or two, or a thought or a comment on this topic or on any other thing that's on your mind, let us know. Head over to ascendoreliability.com/go/SOR. That was kind of a depressing ending, but I hope it, we kind of did a doom and gloom story in this one, Chris. So, but anyway, I'm hoping that it also gives you a sense that, yeah, it's not always easy, but we're here to help if we can. And there's plenty of the other hosts of the show are likewise inclined that if you send over a comment or a question, we'll get back to you and help where and how we can. You can find us on LinkedIn, all of the hosts, and also on our about pages on Ascendo. So plenty of ways for you to get some help or support or a shoulder to cry on or whatever it is you need to advance your career and help your customers, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I don't know if I want to listen to this one later. It's kind of depressing.
A lot of them are depressing because we often have people saying, "Here is a problem in our organization." We go, "Yep."
Well, some of them are, yeah, it's a problem, but there's, clear ways to get around to it. But in other times, we start going off on all the stories of how things are so bad. We got to watch that. Maybe next time we get together, Chris, we got to pick some, success stories and how things actually worked out, because we got plenty of those too.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the problems with that is confidentiality and IP could get us in the way, because we can just, and it sort of gets in the way of us telling the story, because we essentially have to say, trust us. We've seen it work.
Yeah. Well, we can, I know I've told plenty of stories, sanitized, saying it is a company to be unnamed, in this circumstance, and we'll go with that. But we can try with that. We'll think about it and come back on something like that. So anyway, I think I'm going to go get some more coffee now.
Fair enough.
All right. I'll talk to you soon, Chris. Take care.
You too, Fred. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic, that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.